I remember the day I first saw him as if it were yesterday. His presence in the hotel lobby was impossible to ignore, tall, sharply dressed, and radiating the confidence of someone who had never heard the word no. I had heard whispers of his arrival for days. Alexander Harrington, the billionaire who owned the hotel chain I worked for, was coming to inspect our flagship location in New York. For someone like me, his visit felt like a storm cloud looming over my head. My name is Lily Matthews, and I had been working at the Harrington Hotel for 2 years, trying to save up for nursing school. Every morning, I'd wake up before dawn, don my maid's uniform, and brace myself for another day of scrubbing floors, cleaning up after people who didn't know my name, and hiding my dreams behind a smile. This was my reality, until that day. I was assigned to clean the penthouse suite, the crown jewel of the hotel, and Alexander's temporary home. The grandeur of the room still took my breath away every time I entered. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, the finest silk drapes framed floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the Manhattan skyline, and marble floors gleamed under the sunlight. As I busied myself with making the bed, I heard the door click open. I turned, expecting to see my supervisor, but instead, there he stood. Alexander Harrington himself. His eyes, a piercing blue, scanned the room before they landed on me. He arched an eyebrow, clearly not expecting to find a maid in his suite at that moment. "Who are you?" His voice was as cold as the air that seemed to rush into the room with him. I stammered, I'm Lily, sir. I'm just finishing up the room. I didn't know you would be arriving so soon." He stepped closer, scrutinizing me as if I were a speck of dirt on his polished floor. "Clearly. Do you always take this long to clean? Or is incompetence just part of your charm?" I felt my cheeks flush with embarrassment and anger, but I forced a smile. "I'm almost done, sir. I'll be out of your way in a minute." He smirked. "Don't bother. I've seen enough. And let me guess, you're working here because it's the best you could do, right? Some people just aren't cut out for more." His words sliced through me like a knife. I bit my lip to keep from crying and nodded, avoiding his gaze. "Pathetic," he muttered, turning his back to me. "Just get out." I hurried out of the room, my heart pounding in my chest, tears threatening to spill. How could someone be so cruel? I had heard stories about rich men like him, detached, arrogant, and heartless, but I had never experienced it firsthand until now. It was one thing to work hard and earn little, it was another to be made to feel worthless because of it. That night, I went home and cried. I had endured rude guests before, but something about Alexander's words stuck with me. His disdain felt personal, like he saw something in me that he despised. Little did I know that this was just the beginning of our story, a story that would twist and turn in ways I could never have imagined. Days turned into weeks, and Alexander Harrington became a constant presence in the hotel. Every time I saw him, my stomach twisted with anxiety. He had made it his mission to make my life miserable, it seemed. He would find reasons to criticize my work, to point out the smallest mistakes, and he never missed an opportunity to remind me of my place. One afternoon, I was cleaning the lobby when I heard his voice behind me. "Miss Matthews," he called, his tone dripping with condescension. I turned, bracing myself for another verbal assault. "Yes, Mr. Harrington?" He held up a small piece of paper, a receipt. "You charged me for a drink from the minibar that I didn't consume. Do you even know how to do your job?" I frowned, taking the receipt from him. "I'm sorry, sir. I'll fix it right away. That's what you always say, isn't it?" He leaned in closer, his voice low and menacing. "You think a simple apology will fix everything. But you know what, Miss Matthews? People like you never learn. You're stuck in your little bubble, content with mediocrity, because it's all you'll ever be capable of." I felt the tears welling up in my eyes again, but I refused to let him see me cry. Not this time. I clenched my fists, swallowing the retort that burned on my tongue. "You know what's really tragic?" he continued, his voice cold. "You probably had dreams once. Big dreams, right? And now look at you, cleaning up after people like me. Isn't that just sad? The words hit me harder than they should have. It wasn't just the insult, it was the truth in them. I did have dreams once. But life had a way of crushing those dreams, of making you settle for less than you deserved. I wanted to scream at him, to tell him that he didn't know anything about my life, my struggles, or my pain. But instead, I nodded, muttering another apology before walking away. I could feel his eyes on me, piercing through my back like daggers. That night, I couldn't sleep. His words echoed in my mind, gnawing at my self-esteem. I hated that he had this power over me, that his opinion mattered so much. But deep down, I knew why. It wasn't just about his wealth or status, it was about what he represented. He was everything I had wanted to be but never could. And his disdain for me was a reminder of all the ways I had failed. But as the weeks passed, something began to change. The more Alexander pushed me, the more determined I became to prove him wrong. I refused to let him break me. I started working harder, paying more attention to detail, and refusing to let his insults get under my skin. If he wanted to see me crumble, he would be sorely disappointed. Then came the day that changed everything. It was a Friday evening, and the hotel was hosting a gala for some of New York's elite. I was assigned to work the event, serving drinks and cleaning up after the guests. I kept my head down, trying to avoid Alexander's gaze as he mingled with the crowd, but it wasn't long before he found me. "Lily," he said, his voice startlingly close. I looked up to find him standing in front of me, a strange expression on his face. "Yes, sir?" I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need you to take care of something for me," he said, his tone unusually soft. He handed me a small velvet box. "I want you to deliver this to the woman in the red dress over there." I hesitated, glancing at the box. "Is there anything else, sir?" He shook his head, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Just do as I asked." I nodded and made my way across the room to the woman in question. She was beautiful, with blonde hair cascading down her back and a smile that could light up the darkest room. As I approached her, I couldn't help but feel a pang of jealousy. She was everything I wasn't: elegant, confident, and clearly wealthy. "Excuse me, ma'am," I said, holding out the box. "Mr. Harrington asked me to give this to you." Her smile faltered for a moment as she took the box, her eyes scanning my face. "Thank you," she said, her voice tinged with something I couldn't quite place. I turned to leave, but before I could, she called after me. "Wait," she said, her voice soft. "What's your name?" I hesitated. "Lily." She nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Thank you, Lily." I nodded and hurried away, feeling an inexplicable sense of unease. I glanced back at Alexander, who was watching me from across the room. Our eyes met, and for a moment, I thought I saw something different in his gaze, something almost regretful. But the moment passed, and the mask of arrogance slipped back into place. He turned away, dismissing me with a flick of his hand. And just like that, the strange encounter was over. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a shift in our dynamic, one that would force both of us to confront our deepest fears, regrets, and desires. The gala ended in a blur of laughter and clinking glasses. I spent the rest of the night cleaning up after the guests, trying to shake off the strange feeling that lingered after my interaction with Alexander. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop thinking about the look in his eyes when he handed me that box. The following week, things began to change in subtle but significant ways. Alexander wasn't as harsh with me as he used to be. His insults became less frequent, and he started acknowledging my presence with a nod instead of a sneer. It was confusing, to say the least. I couldn't figure out what had caused the shift, and it made me uneasy. One day, as I was cleaning the hallway near the penthouse, I heard voices coming from Alexander's suite. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but the door was slightly ajar, and I couldn't help but overhear the conversation. "Alex, you can't keep doing this," a woman's voice said. It sounded familiar, and it took me a moment to realize it was the woman from the gala, the one in the red dress. "Doing what, Clarissa?" Alexander replied, his voice tense. Pushing people away. Hurting them before they can hurt you. You're not the only one who's been through things, you know. There was a long pause before Alexander spoke again. I don't need your pity, Clarissa. I've made peace with my past. Have you? She asked, her voice softening. Or are you just hiding behind your money and your power? You can't keep running from your feelings, Alex. Eventually, they'll catch up to you. I heard footsteps, and I quickly moved away from the door, not wanting to be caught. But her words stuck with me. Was Alexander hiding something? Some pain or trauma that drove his cruel behavior? A few days later, I got my answer. It was late in the evening, and I was finishing up my shift when I heard someone calling my name. I turned to see Alexander standing in the hallway, looking unusually disheveled. His tie was loosened, and his eyes were red, as if he hadn't slept in days. Lily, he said, his voice raw. I need to talk to you. I hesitated, unsure of what to say. This was the first time he had spoken to me without a hint of malice in his tone. What is it, Mr. Harrington? Please, he said, running a hand through his hair. Just call me Alex. I nodded, still wary. Okay, Alex. What's going on? He sighed, leaning against the wall as if the weight of the world was on his shoulders. I've been a jerk to you, and I know it. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need to explain something. I waited, my heart pounding in my chest. My father, he began, his voice barely above a whisper. He was a terrible man. He used to tell me that kindness was weakness, that the only way to succeed in life was to crush everyone beneath you. He drilled that into me from a young age, and I guess I believed him. I frowned, not expecting this level of vulnerability from him. Alex, you don't have to. Yes, I do, he interrupted, his eyes pleading with me to listen. I pushed people away because I was scared. Scared of being hurt, of being seen as weak. And I took it out on you because you reminded me of what I lost. I blinked, taken aback. What do you mean? My mother, he said, his voice cracking. She was a maid, just like you. She was kind, compassionate, and strong. But my father, he broke her. He made her believe she was worthless, and eventually, she believed him. She died when I was young, and I never forgave myself for not standing up for her. Tears welled up in my eyes as I listened to his story. I had never imagined that someone like Alexander could carry so much pain. I'm sorry, Lily, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I've been lashing out at you because you remind me of her, the strength she had, the kindness I lost. But that's not an excuse for what I've done. I don't know how to be any different. For the first time, I saw Alexander not as the arrogant billionaire who made my life miserable, but as a broken man who was still haunted by his past. And in that moment, something shifted between us. I took a deep breath, wiping away my tears. Alex, you're right, you can't change the past. But you can choose to be better. You don't have to be your father. He looked at me, his eyes filled with something I had never seen before, hope. Do you really believe that? I nodded, offering him a small smile. I do. And in that moment, I realized that maybe, just maybe, we were both capable of healing, together. The days that followed were a whirlwind of change. Alexander, no, Alex, began to open up to me more and more. He started treating me with kindness, and slowly but surely, our relationship began to shift from one of hostility to one of understanding. It wasn't easy. We had our fair share of arguments, and there were moments when I doubted whether we could truly move past our painful history. But each time, Alex would apologize, and I would forgive him, because I knew he was trying. And so was I. A year later, we stood hand in hand on the rooftop of the Harrington Hotel, gazing out at the city skyline. It was the same place where we had first clashed, but now it held a different significance. It was the place where we had found each other, where we had both learned to let go of the past and embrace the future. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Alex turned to me with a smile. Lily, He said softly, "I never thought I'd find someone who could see past the walls I put up, someone who could help me heal. But you did. You've changed my life in ways I can't even begin to describe." Tears filled my eyes as I squeezed his hand. "And you've changed mine, Alex. You've shown me that even the most broken hearts can find love again." We shared a tender kiss, the city lights twinkling around us like stars. And in that moment, I knew that our story had only just begun. Months later, we were married in a small, intimate ceremony with our closest friends and family. And a year after that, we welcomed our first child into the world, a beautiful baby girl named Grace, in honor of the mother who had inspired us both. As I held her in my arms, I couldn't help but marvel at how far we had come. From a cruel billionaire and a struggling maid to a loving family, we had defied the odds and created a life filled with love, laughter, and hope. And as I looked into Alex's eyes, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, because we had found something worth fighting for. Our happy ending. If you liked this story, please subscribe, like, click the bell, and leave a comment. Thank you in advance.